outstretched hand.
Hi, this is Max from Belonging, and welcome to episode 9 of What is School Belonging? Joining me today is Rasha Hamid, who's an educator, activist, author, and advocate with over 25 years of experience in classrooms spanning East Harlem, Brooklyn, and Khartoum. Rasha holds degrees from Vassar College and Bank Street College of Education, and she spent her career centering on creating learning spaces that are just, joyful, equitable, and deeply inclusive. As an autistic and ADHD author and parent, Rasha brings rich lived experiences to her work. She began creating children's books to fill a critical gap, ensuring every child sees their own identity, experiences, and passions mirrored in their learning environments. I love her books. How to Bird is a beautiful book about birding and belonging, which is it's an invitation for all children to connect with nature and birding right where they are. And she's also written Hello Beech Tree, which is also an amazing story about an actual classroom or a class and their relationship with nature and trees. Uncommonly Curious, Eternally Autistic, that actually names autism and doesn't just hint at it or dance around it. And for me, her work reminds us that true inclusion, true belonging is not just about the word or even just about only presence, but it's about the conversations and relationships that are built to make sure every young person, every person feels safe, freedom to share their whole self. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. I always love talking to educators and making this work practical for children in classrooms. So make sure you share, comment, like, reach out. Thanks for watching. I'm very busy. You work at a school, you do a lot for special ed, and special ed is in a challenging state.
Yes.
It always has been, but even more now. So I appreciate you making time for this, but I noticed in your books, you make sure to throw the word belonging in there too. And so it's a question of not necessarily the line between inclusion and belonging, but how you view those in practice.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I'm in an all ICT school, so every classroom from K through 5 is inclusive, and we have a really wide range of kids in every possible way. It's a very diverse school, and I really appreciate that we have kids at our school who have come to us sometimes with the 12-to-1 classification, but their families wanted them in an inclusive setting. And some of those kids have really thrived at our school. But what I notice sometimes is that kids, even when they're getting their services and they have a good relationship with teachers, and the teachers may know their families well, that sometimes those kids seem pretty left out. Right, so they're included, technically speaking. They're in classrooms with kids who don't have IEPs. They're in a classroom where there's one gen ed and one special education teacher, but when I see them at recess, they may be by themselves. When I see them working sometimes, they're working by themselves. When I talk to teachers about them, even teachers who are kind to the students and say nice things about them, don't actually believe they can engage in the same work or work at the same level as children that don't have IEPs. And honestly, it makes me really sad. I've started writing goals into IEPs with teachers about friendships that are, goals that kind of force adults to work with kids on building those relationships. So goals that have like specific steps that kids need to learn to follow. 1, to establish connections, but 2, to know what friendship really means, right? Like, we're working in a time where a lot of adults, and I don't know if you've heard this, but a lot of adults will say things like, oh, come take a seat next to your friend, or, find a friend to work with. And I think for some neurodivergent kids, they maybe don't understand that friend doesn't mean the same thing as peer, because we're using the word friend instead of the word peer,
Mm-hmm.
classmate, when that's what we really mean. And I think sometimes it puts kids who are already excluded
Mm-hmm.
often at risk of believing someone is being their friend when they're actually not being treated well. And so I think about all of those things, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like inclusion, but inclusion has to mean more than putting a kid in a space, and it has to mean more than teaching kids who are perceived as different social skills, right? We also have to teach neurotypical kids how to be inclusive,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because for me, as an educator, that's as much their responsibility as anyone else's.
For sure. A question, and I love how you're using your position as case manager, case managing, to make it legal. We are obligated now to. It's genius. But how do you then teach? How do you ensure that teachers, and I'm saying this in a loving way with teachers, but like sort of build those skills within themselves to, you know, um, demystify how friendships are made. Like, do you have power over professional development? Can you do one-on-one coaching, or just ideas that you would love to do too?
Good questions. I I find the places where I can have an impact, and I try to use those spaces. So no, I unfortunately don't have a lot of say about professional development. I've tried to build into my own accommodations some teaching to the staff around ableism and working against ableism. I've tried to build into my own accommodations permission to build a curriculum around neurodiversity and
Mm-hmm.
disability.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't happened yet. I'll bring it up
Mm-hmm.
when we review my accommodations again.
Mm-hmm.
But when I talk with providers, our related service providers, I might kind of chat up a possible friendship that I see, right? So
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, do you think you might want to work with these two kids together? I know
Mm-hmm.
that this kid really loves primates, and this kid is like obsessed with King Kong. And I think this might, be a like really beautiful friendship if they have the opportunity to spend some time together.
Nice.
I do the same thing with our counseling, our
Mm-hmm.
counseling team, and say, hey, I know that you've got these kids on your caseload. Do you think they might be able to work together? Or we might talk about providers pushing into recess to
Mm-hmm.
support friendship building, right? And so I kind of work in those ways. As I mentioned, I think before, I also lead the sing along, our
Mm-hmm.
weekly sing along, and so that's like a whole school sing along. One of the things that I started doing, actually inspired by my next book, which is kind of in the pipeline, called The Lantern Walk, is I started having a sign up song at the end of every sing along. So kids
Mm-hmm.
can sign up to sing a verse of This Little Light of Mine.
Oh.
That's been a really joyful way of kind of introducing some kids who might not otherwise be known to
Yeah.
the community in a way that's really positive, where they get to be seen in a really beautiful light for their like musical talents and their joy and the
Mm-hmm.
interesting things they decide to sing about. And I sing a lot of songs that I joke are for brainwashing kids. They're like
Mm-hmm.
"I Will Be Your Friend," you
Mm-hmm.
know, songs that give kids phrases that support them in being inclusive. So, I
And
just try to kind of get it in where I can.
you're finding your ways. My son just picked up his copy of Ashley Bryan's This Little Light of Mine. He's 20, and he just said, "I remember this." It was
Yes,
like kids remember that. It's not just the tune. It's not just words. It means something.
that's right.
I think so. I hear you finding your ways, and I think this is a lot of how sometimes we have to coach younger teachers who are trying to figure out where their mission, where their values fit in a very toxic climate. And I was thinking about when I read this, Uncommonly Curious, Eternally Autistic,
Hmm.
it reminded me of when, just the title, to be honest with you, let alone the book, it made me think of all the ways that parents of neurodivergent kids are so excited we're so excited for crumbs, right? We're so excited that we can find the character in the movie who might show some sign of maybe a writer wrote them as neurodiverse or
Yeah.
wow, like even people we hate, like, oh wow, who's that guy? The guy who owned Virgin Airlines. Oh, Steve something. He's dyslexic. He's evil, but he's successful. And it's
Right.
like we're scraping the bottom here. So I was so excited. I'm like, let's just name it. So while I hear you finding pathways, sometimes subtly, one, how'd you make the decision to name it, to put it out there? And then two, have you seen any impact, whether it's been at your school or in talking about the book?
I think there have been definitely some moments when I feel like, all right, this is, it's good that I'm saying these things. I feel like most people who know me have heard me say the word autism or autistic like thousands of times over the past few years, mostly because I just wanted to normalize talking about it. Right? It's like I said the word over and over and over again so that people would stop like flinching when they heard the word autistic. I think there's one family that I'm thinking about that I worked with who really just did a complete about face in how they were thinking about their kid. And that happened through many, many conversations. And I've seen that happen over years at school of having conversations. I think one of the things I really love about being autistic and having ADHD and having a kid who's autistic and has ADHD is that I can talk about the things that I want to share with families without them feeling like I'm pointing at them, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not talking about your kid. I'm not talking about you. I'm just sharing this experience that I had with my own kid. Or saying things like, wow, your kid reminds me so much of my kid at that age because this and this and this and this. And then, throwing in later that, oh yeah, my kid's autistic too. And I've seen the conversation shift. And I think part of it is that I just talk about things a lot and share a lot of stories. But I think in part, there are also just more conversations going on everywhere about neurodivergence and autism.
Do you notice teachers who don't necessarily have a special ed background who are understanding that autism is not a tier 3, in the modern parlance, like is not a get the kid out of the room. It's not a resource room situation. Most kids, I don't think there really are any kids that should be tiered in that way to begin with, but I think that made its way into the culture of teaching within the past 5 or 10 years with MTSS or RTI or whatever it was.
I don't know. And you differentiated between gen ed and special ed educators. And I actually don't think that's the split. I think there are special education teachers who no idea what they're talking about when it comes to autism and don't see the bias in themselves and the way they run their classrooms at all, and are unwilling to even hear me talk about it. And I think there are gen ed teachers who are absolutely brilliant supporting kids across the spectrum of neurodiversity because they get to know kids well and they're strong observers, right? And they believe that kids want to be successful, right? So I don't think there's a gen ed special education split. I think that the teachers who have made growth have been able to extrapolate from a conversation about one child to generalize in their classroom more. Where I've seen growth is I've seen like teachers learn that regulation is a thing and to pay attention to it. I've seen teachers begin to recognize that, for example, the noise level or the visual input matters. I often will like share about one classroom to another classroom. I'll say, hey, I saw that like this XYZ classroom that's always totally calm and chill, where every kid makes a lot of growth. They usually have their lights out. I noticed that it's really quiet, like they have fun and they might like get a little bit boisterous and noisy sometimes, but they always bring it back, right? And then like follow it with some quiet. Or I noticed that in XYZ classroom, where all the kids follow the instructions really easily. They post the instructions on the board, so kids can refer back to them. And there are teachers who will take that and be like, wow, that's a great idea, and do it right away.
Yeah.
And then there are teachers who are like, why would I do? Literally, I have heard teachers ask questions like, why would I do that? After complaining about a kid who's not following instructions, right?
Right.
I was thinking about a kid who had a really hard year recently. One of the things that was happening was that multiple adults didn't believe that they belonged in ICT. And some of the reasons that the adults gave were that the kid really struggled with attention, which was true, and which was more true in a classroom that was very noisy, where there was a lot of movement and a lot of mess, right? And one of the reasons was that kids weren't kind to this kid. Like, they just weren't being nice to this kid. I went in to observe. It was like the day of the IEP meeting. And I went in to observe because I wanted to really know what I was talking about when I went into that meeting. I didn't want to just make assumptions that I knew what I was talking about, because what was being reported was very different than what I was seeing. So I said, okay, what's the time that I should come in to see the things that you're concerned about? And I went in and I observed, and I did see that the kid struggled with attention, that the kid sometimes made noises, and that kids were really unkind to this kid. And I thought about it, and this is what usually happens with me in observations, is I'll like tumble something over in my head sometimes for days. But what I realized eventually was that kids were treating this kid the way that adults were treating this kid, period. This child had this kind of policing happening from multiple adults in the space, and kids were speaking to the kid in the same way that they were hearing adults speak to this kid. I've seen this happen so frequently. And usually it's a Black boy or another Black child who is being policed in that manner. And I think it's related to how ableism and racism intersect, right? I saw this a lot with my kid as well when he was in school, where the way that a child is perceived not only is impacted by their disability, diagnosed or undiagnosed, but is also impacted by who they are.
So let's talk about nature. We talked brief. I see your plants. You said you've got tomatoes outside.
Yeah.
In your bird book, which I'm a very, very, very amateur bird person, but love watching the majesticness of birds. Oh, here, it's this one. I love you start with belonging. It's, you say you belong here as a birder, and then you talk about visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. So tell us about your passion with birds and nature. And then
the truth is that I'm not a great birder, that I started birding during the pandemic, like so many other people. I've always been kind of a watcher of nature. I remember spending time with my grandmother. My grandparents had a tiny bungalow near Peekskill, New York, in a place called Buchanan. And we used to walk at night, and she would say, oh, those are the blue jays. We'd hear them, or those kinds of things. But I never really thought of myself as a birder. And then during the pandemic, I am so lucky to live, one, in subsidized housing, a subsidized co-op in a Mitchell-Lama program, and two, a block from Central Park.
Wow.
So during the pandemic, I was like, I just need to get outside. And I was lucky enough to have, the park nearby, and I started getting to know the North Woods a little bit. The North Woods in Central Park, you don't even, other than the sounds that come in from like the helicopters or the sirens going by, you can like really feel like you're not in the city.
That's amazing.
So I spent time there, and I think the first bird that I saw that I was like, what in the world, was just this tiny little magnolia warbler. And I had no idea that there were birds I have lived near Central Park since middle school. I've lived in New York City for almost my entire life. I had no idea that there were birds like this. So I started checking out some of the birds. I started taking pictures because I'm really into photography and my memory is terrible. And then I found myself having a few things happened. One was that I had probably thousands of bird pictures taking up way too much hard drive space. And also there was that incident in the Ramble in Central Park where Christian Cooper had the police called on him for trying to get someone to not mess with the birds by having their dog off leash. And I thought, like, it made me really angry, like the park had become such a place of refuge for me. Has always been, but has been such a wonderful place to be, especially during the pandemic, and to have someone try to take that away, to have someone threaten a Black person trying to just enjoy the birds in Central Park in the middle of New York City. It made me really angry, in part because my kid is my kid. And he also loves Central Park, him and the dog. And I just felt like, no, like this is a public space. At our school, we use the language of commons a lot. You're not going to make people feel unwelcome in the public spaces that belong to all of us. And so that was kind of where How to Bird started, kind of in that context. And then having someone come up to me and ask what I was looking at. And there was this huge, like, red-tailed hawk in a tree. And she's like, wow, I never would have noticed that. How did you notice that? And I thought, whoa, these things that are so obvious to me, later connecting it to my ADHD and my autism, right? Of like noticing that something doesn't fit visually, or or something moved out of the corner of my eye, that this is not automatic for everyone. So I started thinking about, like, wow, how could I explain to someone how to find birds outside, and how do I let kids know? There are so many kids, like, right here in New York City who have no idea that some of the best birding in the country is right here.
That's amazing.
So that was where I started, and I actually wrote and illustrated the whole book myself.
I didn't know that. So the photos are yours
they
too?
redid it.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of those are still my bird pictures. Most of the kid pictures are my kid pictures, many of which were just from being outside in the park with my class. A lot of those kids are my actual students.
That's so cute.
And very few of them posed for me. Most of them were just like outside doing nature-y things.
I love the idea of commons too. Like, this is the birds, this land. Who does this all belong to? It's all shared. It's all of ours. So it's really beautiful. And I think going back to what you were saying before about the one child at your school who had trouble, I think one thing that I noticed more so as I became a parent or learned how to parent, or we're always still learning, but was that my kids were so often reduced to maybe it was one identity or two. And when we would come in as parents and say, and he loves Legos, and he loves birding, and nature, and he loves snakes, and he wants to be an actor. Like, sometimes you would watch, like, well, no. Like, I'm just trying to support, I'll give the benefit of the doubt, support this child that I've never experienced before in the classroom. It was like, wait a minute, he's just as full and human as everyone. But
I feel like we had that conversation so many times. Like that was the extent of every parent teacher conference that my kid's dad and I had, right? Was like, honestly, trying to get a whole bunch of buzzwords in while also helping the teachers to see him as a whole person. I have a poem that I'll share with you if you haven't come across it, that I wrote for my kid when he was 10 or 11. It was right after Trayvon Martin was killed. And I think he had just seen me shaking my head or being upset reading the news and asked me what happened. And I'm very honest with my kid, especially since, like, there are conversations that, we have to have, right? And I ended up writing a poem about it called For Jabril, Superhero.
Oh, I
It's
don't think I've
also
seen it.
called You Have My Permission to Wear a Hoodie. I think my kid is such an interesting kid, and so many people don't see him in that light. Like, he had an awful, awful time in sixth grade. It was probably his um, most miserable year of school.
Hmm.
He cried every single night, like for the first month of school. Um, and it was there were just a few years that we were living in Sudan.
Okay.
And so we were both at the same school because
Okay.
here we've never been at the same school.
Hmm.
But we were teaching in the same school. And so I was watching my kid in school. I was seeing how mean his teacher was to him.
Hmm.
This was an international school.
Okay.
I would say that the culture was largely British, and his teacher, man, I'm just
Wow.
thinking about a lot of things at once. But that sixth grade class that he was in had been with me and my co-teacher the year before.
Wow.
So
Okay.
all of those students were kids we cared deeply about, who we'd had a wonderful time with, for the previous year. And they got to sixth grade, and it was like these teachers were trying to destroy everything we had built. I remember the first time I ended up teaching music that following year. And the first time those kids came to me for music, the kids who had been with me the year prior,
Mhm.
um,
They were like, save us.
oh my God, they said, okay, make a circle and we'll get started. And they went, a circle.
Yeah.
But this teacher was so mean to my kid that other kids reported it to their families. I still get choked up thinking about how mean she was. That was a really bad year for my kid. Couldn't see
Okay.
anything positive in him. She couldn't see that like his math skills were really strong, and he was really quick at recalling facts. She couldn't see that he was maybe the most inclusive and welcoming kid in the school. He was the only kid, partially because we grew up in New York, he grew up in New York and he had, lived here,
Yeah.
who greeted every like guard and cleaner and driver, knew everyone and everyone knew him. Because for him, like everyone's the same. You know what I mean?
Right. But I think that's where we see the threat. Like, either there's a problem here that I have no idea how to solve, or they're revealing what I'm not capable of. So I'm going to use my power to try to squelch this. It's very dangerous, and we don't talk about it enough. I finally found one social media thing where there's a teacher, it's a white woman, which is really good, who's saying, let's have honest conversations about how teachers hurt kids. And we can both love teachers and say we are not trained well enough. Like, we're not getting the right kind of training, or we're not recruiting the right people, or like whatever it is. We have to be able to have that conversation.
I think there are so many conversations we're not having. And I think about how those same experiences that my kid has had and continues to have, unfortunately, that I had kind of a different version of those experiences, right? Because I loved school. Like, school was my special interest. I realized it wasn't that I could pay attention in school. It was that I already knew all the things because my mom was a teacher. I'm great at multiple choice tests, like really, really good, and I experienced a lot of microaggressions differently than my kid. People didn't see me as a threat until I got to college. It's a whole other story. I'm 5'3", by the way. I know, like, you can't really tell, but I'm like this tiny little person. For the most part, like, people weren't afraid of me. I mean, Bronx Science, right? Like, I applied to Vassar as kind of a reach school, which is ridiculous considering my grades, my scores, like all of those things, but like nobody encouraged me. I mean, whatever. I wouldn't have wanted to go to some of the other schools anyway, but that they didn't think I was capable. I remember in high school once they refused to change my math class. I don't remember what the issue was. It was early in the year, maybe a month into the school year. I needed to change my math class for some reason. And they told me that they didn't think I could handle a change in my math class at this point in the year. I said to them, I have a 98 average. Why would you think that I couldn't handle this? And in a way I was lucky, and maybe, your kids have the same luck in a way, and that my mom is white. And so often when my mother came in to advocate for me, people listen, not all the time. I had one teacher say to her, well, that might be true, but I'm tenured and you can't do anything about it.
Wow.
So it didn't always work to have the white mom come in, but often people listen to her. I said that Jib's dad and I used to try to get a lot of buzzwords in. It would be like literal language. He doesn't read facial expressions. Blah, blah. He really loves this, like all those things at the same time. But the other thing that I had to do during those conferences was force people to look at Jibril's dad. They would not look at him. I would say, right?
Yeah. Tell me this. This can be our last one because you've given me so much of your time. I'm so grateful. But we've talked about educators, but like if a new educator walked into your school and you're the first person to kind of sit down with them, and how do you teach that person, like here at this school or in the world we're creating for kids, here's what we do, or here's what I want you to be able to do. How do you explain that?
I've been thinking a lot about this. I actually just put together a list of the PD that I think that people should have, because I don't know if anybody's going to pay attention to it. But
will you share that? I'll send it out.
I will absolutely share it with you. But that's what I've really been thinking about, is like, what are the things that need to be taught in order for kids to be successful and feel included and actually belong, right? At school. And one thing that I've been thinking about is talking about universal design. I've had a number of different positions where I was doing PD. When I was doing some PD, part of what I was doing was trying to have the PD model how I wanted kids to be supported. So having multiple options for people to engage with the same content, for example. This year, one of the things I'm thinking about, or actually I've had it sitting, but nobody has been willing to use it, is an kind of an ableism classroom setup checklist, or like a universal design checklist, so that people are thinking about having multiple seating options before kids show up, having multiple options for writing utensils before kids show up, so that it's not that we're constantly adjusting things to accommodate for kids, but we're creating a classroom that already supports learners, right? I really have wanted and have been pushing for a few years. One of our OTs was willing to do some professional development. I think OT should be doing PD at the beginning of the year. How do you set up your classroom so the kids stay regulated? Because if they're not regulated, nobody's learning. They're not learning, but nobody else is either. And if you as an adult can't stay regulated, nobody's learning, right? And so, like, why not start there? Why not teach those skills to kids when we're doing our first 6 weeks, a la, responsive classroom, but like teaching regulation strategies, teaching the tools that we have available in the classroom, teaching social and emotional learning skills about including people, talking about disability, talking about ableism. And at our school, we talk about kids' pronouns, we talk about race, we talk about all these identifying factors. Why aren't we talking about disability also? And when I've done that in the classroom, it's been so empowering for kids, and so helping adults to kind of see those connections, or how like every administrator in my school has a standing desk, and I'm trying to get one for a kid, and they're like, oh no, the kid doesn't. Well, why do we all need it then? You need the standing desk, but the kid, the 7 or 8 year old should just suck it up and sit still.
Well, then you get into that awful gaslighting message of it gets better. So if you just wait and deal with this and suck it up, then you'll finally get your standing desk, or then you'll be respected, or then you can access support.
Kid in question made their own standing desk with hollow blocks. I'm saying,
there you go.
so often. The other thing I think that I've been talking more about lately is listening to kids. Kids will tell you exactly what they need. And then adults will say, oh, now is not a good time, or I don't think you need that thing. And then kid has meltdown.
Mhm.
And adults are writing them up for years, but they
Very
told
much
you they
so.
needed a break.
Right.
They
Right.
told you they needed to take a walk and get water or whatever it was, and you
Right.
said no.
Right. Well,
You know?
and that's very much in the conversation right now publicly about, I sent the kindergartner, to the principal's office, and they ran down the hall and they couldn't wait to get to the principal's office. And I understand teachers are frustrated. They want quick justice, but it's like, really, the kid needed to run. They needed to touch the Legos in my office, and they needed someone to say, "How are you today?"
Or
Like,
just,
we don't need a punishment to get there, and that's really something that we are having trouble with as a profession, I think.
I would love to share a fun story with you to wrap
Please,
up.
yeah.
I got the strangest email one day from my kid's principal. He was in high school already. It was his birthday. It was my kid's birthday. And I'm like, come on, man. My birthday. And the principal says in the email that, like, it's confusing, and he recognizes that it's confusing, but he's going to try to tell me what happened.
Okay.
What happened was my kid on his birthday decided that he wanted Kool-Aid.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable. Said kid went to one teacher, got a bowl, went to another teacher, got permission to get the staff lounge.
Clever.
Went to another teacher. I mean, whatever happened in the end, he had 3 quarts of Kool-Aid in a 5-quart bowl.
Oh my God.
Carrying around the school. And he got to his music class, and his music teacher said, if you want to drink that, you can take it to the principal's office. And Jabril went, okay. He had no idea he got kicked out of class. No idea. When I got home, I said, Jabril, the teacher kicked you out of class and sent you to the principal. He was like, no. He said that if I wanted to drink it, I could go to Pete's office, and so I did.
Yeah.
Anyway,
was he able to drink it? How did the principal
I
receive
think he
him?
probably did.
Okay. So when he got to celebrate his quest, but the systems in the school were not ready to celebrate him in the way he needed to be.
He said to me I had never told him that he couldn't make Kool-Aid at school, and it is true. I never told him that.
Right. I love it, and this is where too often educators say schools are not built for children, which is so hard to reconcile. I'm so grateful. I heard you working on another book. You said,
yes.
You said, say the title again.
Right now, called The Lantern Walk, a winter solstice story. It is like Hello Beech Tree, based on a true story from about a kid in the Beech class. When I ended up popping back into the classroom a few years ago. And it's a story about friendship and inclusion, really. It's a book that I'm actually using to celebrate some of the kids at my school who are the most welcoming and inclusive. Those are the kids who are going to be the characters in the book. And it's about kids supporting each other to be brave when something is hard or scary.
I love it. Well, thank you for all you put out into the world, and for being a teacher who stays true to your mission of inclusivity, belonging, and I hear so much of your own personal story you put into your work.
An outstretched hand, smiling eyes, comfort humming through the halls, tracing lines I used to hide. Found a lock that turned inside. It's more than just